1,000 years ago, a man named Gilfus Eldragon stood at the very peak of the world. He was known as the strongest warrior in history. No army could defeat him, no monster could challenge him. His power was so overwhelming that even his name alone terrified entire kingdoms. By that time, Gilfus had already reached the legendary 10-star level, a realm that almost no human had ever achieved. But even that was not enough for him. His goal was the true apex of martial arts. One day, a legend reached his ears. A rumor about a mysterious fruit hidden deep within an ancient valley. A fruit said to grant unlimited power and eternal life. Without hesitation, Gilfus traveled to the location. But the fruit was not unguarded. Protecting it was a terrifying dragon. A creature so powerful that even armies feared to approach it. And yet, Gilfus fought the dragon and won. When the battle finally ended, his body was completely covered in wounds. Blood ran down his face as he struggled to remain conscious. Behind him lay the massive corpse of the dragon. Even in death, the creature still radiated a terrifying presence. And yet somehow, this young warrior had managed to survive a battle with such a monster. As Gilfus slowly regained his senses, something strange caught his attention. At the center of the valley stood an ancient tree. A tree that seemed to radiate a mysterious energy, as if it had existed for centuries. Inside the tree, something shimmered, a golden fruit, its surface covered in dragon-like scales, an object that clearly contained unimaginable power. The moment Gilfus saw it, something deep within his blood began to react. It was almost as if the fruit was calling out to him. Without hesitation, he reached forward and grabbed the glowing fruit. The moment he touched it, a powerful surge of energy erupted from within. Golden light surrounded his entire body, and without thinking twice, Gilfus bit into the mysterious fruit. The moment he swallowed it, an overwhelming power exploded inside his body. Golden light burst out from every part of him. The energy surged through his veins like a raging storm. It felt as if something ancient had finally awakened. This was no ordinary fruit. Years later, far away, in a completely different place, a wealthy family gathered around the bed of a dying old man. The atmosphere inside the room was heavy. Everyone knew his time was running out. The old patriarch slowly opened his eyes. With the last bit of strength remaining in his body, he reached forward and placed his hand on the head of a young boy beside him. At that moment, memories flooded his mind. The dragon, the fruit, and the legend of immortality he once believed. A bitter realization appeared in his eyes. It had all been a lie. The fruit had not granted him eternal life. Now he was dying. And then something strange happened. The mysterious energy from that ancient valley suddenly resonated once again. Back in the mansion, the atmosphere grew heavier with every passing second. The old patriarch lay quietly on his deathbed. For many years he had protected the declining bloodline of their once great clan. But now, his life was finally coming to an end. His son knelt beside the bed, tightly holding his father's frail hand. Tears slowly fell from his eyes. Because once the old patriarch passed away, the family might lose the last pillar holding them together. Suddenly, the old man's eyes widened. A strange light flashed deep within them. For a brief moment, it felt as if a completely different presence had awakened inside him. An ancient will, a soul that once ruled the world. 1,000 years ago, the legendary warrior of the first generation, Gilfus Eldragon. With trembling hands, the old patriarch slowly reached forward. His fingers moved toward the young child standing in the room. But before he could say anything, his strength finally gave out. His body fell back onto the bed. The patriarch had passed away. The room fell silent. Only the quiet cries of the family remained. But at that exact moment, a newborn baby suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze was completely different from that of an ordinary child. Sharp, calm, and strangely aware. The soul of the strongest warrior in history had finally awakened, reborn in the body of his own descendant. But something about this baby was very unusual. Inside this tiny body lived the mind of the most powerful warrior from 1,000 years ago. The legendary fighter who once dominated the world had now been reborn as a helpless infant. As the baby slowly moved his tiny hands, confusion filled his mind. He tried to understand what had happened. Why am I a baby? Fragments of memory suddenly flashed through his mind. Endless battles, powerful enemies, and the overwhelming strength he once possessed. Then suddenly, a familiar image appeared in his consciousness: the ancient valley, the mysterious tree, and the dragon fruit that changed everything. At that moment, the baby finally understood. His soul had not disappeared. Instead, it had traveled 1,000 years into the future, and now he had been reborn inside the body of his own descendant. Realizing this, the baby suddenly began laughing quietly. Even though he was trapped in the body of an infant, his mind still belonged to the strongest warrior in history. Which meant only one thing: the legend of the first generation was about to begin once again. Meanwhile, inside the mansion's nursery, the maids continued their daily routine, carefully checking on each newborn baby. To them, this was just another ordinary day. But suddenly, something terrifying happened. A small goblin-like creature suddenly appeared inside the room. The monster leaped directly toward one of the cribs. Before anyone could react, and let out a savage scream. The maids panicked instantly. Without hesitation, they attacked the creature. One of them quickly forced a bottle filled with strange red liquid into the monster's mouth. The liquid reacted violently inside the creature's body. Its chest began glowing brightly, and within seconds, the monster collapsed, dead. But the chaos didn't end there. Blood from the dying creature splashed across the room, and some of it landed directly on the reincarnated baby. For a moment, the child lay there silently, covered in blood, his eyes wide open. Even though he looked like a helpless infant, his mind was still that of the legendary warrior, and deep inside he began realizing something disturbing. The world he had reincarnated into was far more dangerous than he expected. Even newborn babies were not safe here. But instead of fear, a strange excitement appeared in his eyes. Because if monsters existed in this world, then that meant battles would exist as well. And for the strongest warrior in history, nothing was more exciting than a new battlefield. Soon after, the maids began calming the crying babies. One of them picked up the reincarnated child and tried to soothe him. To stop him from crying, she brought a bottle filled with the same strange red liquid, gently feeding it to him. At first, it looked like ordinary milk, but the moment the liquid touched his mouth, the baby's eyes widened in shock, because the taste was completely different. Inside his mind, ancient memories began reacting. This wasn't normal nourishment. The liquid contained an unbelievable amount of magical energy. Suddenly, an image appeared in his consciousness, a gigantic ancient dragon standing atop a mountain. And instantly he recognized the source of that power. This is dragon blood. Even as a baby, his mind immediately began analyzing the energy flowing through his body. If he could absorb all of this power, his new body might become even stronger than his previous life. Instead of rejecting it, the reincarnated warrior greedily continued drinking the liquid, because to him, this wasn't just milk, it was the first step toward reclaiming his legendary power. The moment the dragon blood entered his body, the baby's entire body began reacting violently. His tiny veins started bulging as the overwhelming magical power spread through his body. Even for someone who was once the strongest warrior in history, this level of power was far too intense for a newborn body. Blood slowly began dripping from the corner of his mouth. But instead of crying, the baby started smiling. Because inside that fragile body lived the mind of a battle-hardened legend. Immediately, he began circulating the energy, forcing the dragon blood's power to merge with his body. The maid holding him suddenly noticed something strange. The baby's body was glowing. Even she could feel the terrifying amount of magic building inside him, but before she could react, the baby continued drinking every drop. Inside his mind, he calmly analyzed the situation. Good, this works in my favor. If he successfully absorbed all of this dragon blood, his new body would become far stronger than his previous life. Soon the violent energy finally settled. The exhausted baby slowly closed his eyes. Suddenly, so sleepy. After surviving the overwhelming power of ancient dragon blood, the reincarnated warrior quietly fell asleep. But far away, inside the training grounds of the clan, a martial artist was practicing with terrifying strength. His kick alone sent a massive stone flying across the yard. Inside this clan, power was everything, and soon, the newborn baby who absorbed dragon blood, would become the most terrifying warrior this world had ever seen. Years passed. The baby who once absorbed dragon blood had grown into a young boy. Every single day he trained relentlessly, punching rocks, strengthening his body, and pushing himself far beyond the limits of ordinary children. His punches alone could send heavy stones flying. His physical strength had already surpassed that of many warriors. But this boy was no ordinary child. He was the reincarnation of the legendary warrior, once known as Gilfus Eldragon. Now, he lived under a new name, Zeke Eldragon. Inside his veins flowed the power of dragon blood, and inside his mind remained the memories of his previous life. As he continued training, a massive energy began gathering inside his chest. The dragon blood he had absorbed years ago was finally awakening. Suddenly, golden energy burst out from his body. Two powerful forces began clashing within him, the power of the ancient warrior and the power of the dragon. For a moment, both energies violently collided, but slowly, the two forces began merging together. And when the light finally faded, Zeke stood there silently. His strength had reached an entirely new level. In his previous life, he had already reached the legendary 10-star rank, a level that very few humans could ever achieve. But in this new life, with dragon blood flowing through his veins, he might become even stronger. However, there was one painful truth. The woman who gave birth to him, his mother, had already passed away. Zeke quietly looked up at the sky, thinking about everything that had happened since his rebirth. This world still didn't know it yet, but the strongest warrior in history had returned. Years later, Zeke continued training every single day. His strength increased with each passing moment. But to him, this still wasn't enough. As he looked around the training grounds, he quickly realized something. There was no one here strong enough to properly train him. Even the warriors around him were far too weak. Just then, a maid approached him. At first glance, she looked like an ordinary servant, but Zeke carefully observed her, and with just a single look, he immediately understood. This maid was actually a 3-star fighter. For most people, a 3-star warrior was already considered extremely strong. Zeke nodded slightly. For now, she would be enough for basic training. But the maid suddenly froze, because the look in Zeke's eyes was nothing like that of a child. For a brief moment, it felt like she was standing in front of a terrifying warrior. And without realizing it, she began feeling nervous, because deep down, her instincts were warning her. The boy standing before her was far from ordinary. Later that day, Zeke quietly left the mansion grounds. Instead of relying only on sparring partners, he decided to train in another way. Deep inside the forest, he searched for medicinal herbs. These herbs were extremely bitter. Most people wouldn't even dare to eat them. But Zeke didn't hesitate. He pulled one straight from the ground and placed it into his mouth. The taste was horrible. For a moment, it nearly made him throw up. But Zeke forced himself to swallow it, because he knew exactly what it did. These herbs strengthened the body from the inside. They accelerated recovery and helped his young body grow stronger much faster. Even though he was once the strongest warrior in history, his current body was still that of a child. So before mastering powerful techniques again, he needed to rebuild his body from the very foundation. But suddenly, Zeke stopped walking. His instincts sensed something strange in the forest, a presence. Slowly, he looked through the bushes, and there it was, a wild monster, a demonic boar roaming deep within the forest. For ordinary people, encountering such a creature would mean death. But Zeke's eyes remained calm, because to him, this was simply another opportunity to train. The demonic boar suddenly noticed Zeke, and without hesitation, it charged straight toward him. Its massive body rushed forward with terrifying speed, crushing bushes and trees in its path. For most people, a monster like this would be a death sentence. But Zeke didn't panic. Instead, a confident smile appeared on his face, because to him, this monster was nothing more than training. The boar lunged forward to attack, but at the very last second, Zeke calmly stepped aside. The beast completely missed its target, and in that instant, Zeke moved. His fist tightened, golden energy began gathering around his hand. Even in this young body, he could still use fragments of his former power. With perfect timing, Zeke threw a single devastating punch. The strike exploded with force, and the demonic boar was sent flying through the air. The monster crashed violently onto the ground, completely defeated. Zeke calmly looked down at his hand. So this body can produce this much damage. Satisfied with the result, he lifted the massive boar onto his shoulders. Tonight's dinner was secured. But Zeke wasn't alone in the forest. Hidden among the trees, someone had been watching the entire fight. A mysterious man dressed in dark clothing, silently observing everything. The man narrowed his eyes. Even though the boy carried the bloodline of a legendary warrior, his current strength still needed proper guidance. Without making a sound, the cloaked figure disappeared into the forest, as if he had never been there at all. The next morning arrived. Zeke returned home after his hunt, carrying supplies and the monster he defeated. But the moment he approached the house, something felt wrong. He slowly pushed the door open and immediately froze. Inside the house, 2 uniformed officers were already waiting, their sharp eyes instantly locked onto him. Clearly surprised to see such a young boy standing there. These men belonged to a powerful organization, one that operated directly under the authority of the Empire. Behind them stood a higher-ranking officer, a man with a cold and commanding presence. The dragon emblem on their uniforms revealed their identity. They were members of the Imperial Investigation Force, and their sudden appearance meant something serious had begun. The officers stared directly at the boy, their expressions filled with curiosity. Zeke stood quietly in front of them, trying to understand why such powerful figures had suddenly appeared in his home. But before he could process everything, he suddenly found himself standing somewhere completely different. In front of a massive academy. This place was known as the Empire's most prestigious training institution, a place where only the most talented individuals were accepted. Towering statues of dragons stood along the entrance, symbolizing the strength and pride of the Empire. Elite instructors guarded the academy gates, warriors capable of crushing most opponents with ease. But for Zeke, this sudden change was overwhelming. He crouched down slightly, holding his head as he tried to process what had just happened. Just then, someone approached him, a cheerful boy with bright blue hair. His name was Langis. Unlike the intimidating soldiers from earlier, Langis spoke with a friendly smile. He carefully looked at Zeke, curious about the quiet newcomer. Even though Zeke appeared calm and reserved, Langis could sense something unusual about him. This one. He looks timid, but he's got some nerve. Without realizing it, Zeke had already begun attracting attention inside the academy, but things quickly became even more complicated. Langis nervously rubbed his arm as he explained the academy's entrance exam. The exam content doesn't really change much every year, but when Zeke mentioned something surprising, Langis suddenly froze. A man with 0 backing. Langis's eyes widened. What? Inside this academy, most students came from powerful noble families, influential clans, or wealthy houses. Someone with absolutely no background support was extremely rare. But before Langis could react further, a voice suddenly interrupted them. Hey, you runt! Langis! Both boys turned around. Standing there was a tall student with a mocking smile. It was Retten, also from Oldscale Village. Unlike Langis, Retten carried himself with complete arrogance. He looked down at Langis like a predator staring at prey. Then he began openly mocking him. Langis immediately shrank back, clearly used to being bullied by him. The surrounding students began laughing, watching the scene like entertainment. But Zeke simply stood there silently, observing everything, because to him, none of this childish intimidation mattered. Meanwhile, within the Empire itself, a strict hierarchy existed. At the very top stood the Eldragon family, their authority backed by the absolute monarch of the Empire. Below them were countless noble houses, all competing for power and influence. And among the younger generation, there was a special group, the rising warriors of the future. They were called the Lesser Dragons, young fighters destined to compete for dominance. And without realizing it, Zeke had just stepped directly into the center of this brutal hierarchy. Within the Empire, there existed a strict hierarchy among those who wielded dragon power. At the lowest official level were the common soldiers. They were known as the Young Dragons, warriors who were still proving their worth. Above them stood the captain class, These were the adult dragons, battle-hardened fighters trusted to lead others into combat. Higher still stood the elders, the executive class, also known as the Elder Dragons. These individuals possessed immense authority and strength. But beneath even the lowest rank, there existed another category, those at the very bottom. They were called the Mock Dragons, people who failed to enter the prestigious Dragon's Nest Academy, or those who could not graduate from it. To the rest of the Empire, they were nothing more than imitations, people mocked as fakes. But Zeke had no intention of accepting such a fate. Inside his mind, his determination burned quietly. I'll prove it. We are not fakes. Meanwhile, the tension outside the academy gates continued to rise. Several arrogant students surrounded Langjis. One of them stepped forward, clearly looking for trouble. He pointed directly at Langjis and began mocking him in front of everyone. The surrounding crowd watched closely, waiting to see what would happen. But beside Langjis, Zeke remained completely calm, as if none of this intimidation affected him. Weak. The word echoed through Zeke's mind. For a moment, he simply stared at them, almost as if the idea itself was ridiculous. Inside his mind, a different image appeared. A dragon, burning with overwhelming power. The true power of dragons was something these students couldn't even begin to imagine. But outside, the mocking continued. One of the students stepped forward angrily, clearly irritated by Zeke's calm attitude. Just as the situation began escalating, a loud voice suddenly interrupted. Attention! 2 officers arrived immediately. Their presence instantly silenced the area. One of them raised a card. Adult Dragon Examiner. The academy entrance examination was about to begin. The arrogant students clicked their tongues in annoyance, then slowly walked away. The confrontation ended before it could escalate. Langjis exhaled quietly in relief. There's no need to get so angry about it. But Zeke simply watched the students leave, his arms folded, his expression calm, because in his mind he was already thinking about something far more important: becoming a dragon. Soon, all the students gathered inside a massive training field. This was where the entrance examination would take place. Hundreds of candidates stood in rows, each of them hoping to pass the academy's brutal test. At the center of the arena stood the examiner, a strict man responsible for judging their abilities. With a serious expression, he raised 3 fingers. Each candidate will have 3 attempts. You must prove your strength within those 3 tries. The moment the rule was announced, the atmosphere instantly became tense. Students began whispering nervously. Some tightened their grip on their weapons. Others tried to calm themselves. But Zeke simply stood there quietly, his arms crossed, completely calm, while Langjis beside him panicked. Then the examiner raised his hand. The test begins now. Immediately, the first student rushed forward. With a loud shout, he swung his sword with all his strength. The blade slammed against a giant stone target. Sparks flew everywhere. Langjis grabbed his head nervously, clearly intimidated by the difficulty of the test, but things quickly became even worse. The next student attacked the stone with everything he had, but instead of breaking, the stone violently rebounded the attack. The shock traveled back through the student's arms, tearing his hands open. Blood splattered across the ground as his weapon slipped from his grip. The crowd gasped. Many students quickly covered their ears, others turned away. The injured student collapsed beside the stone, completely defeated. But the examiner showed no emotion. He simply wrote something in his notebook. First attempt, failed. 2 attempts remaining. Several instructors nearby simply smiled faintly, as if they had expected this result all along. Watching from the crowd, Zeke carefully studied the stone. Something about it seemed unusual. As he examined the fragments around its base, he began realizing something. Langjis quickly explained. If you properly circulate your Aether Source power while attacking, the stone should at least receive a small scratch. Hearing this, Zeke finally understood the real purpose of the test. It wasn't about brute strength. It was about control. The exam was designed to measure how well a warrior could circulate their Aether Source power during combat. Meanwhile, students continued attacking the stone one after another. But the results remained the same: violent recoil, injuries, and failure. Soon the examiner's voice echoed again. Candidate number 51, disqualified. Moments later, another student attacked and was instantly thrown backward by the rebound. Candidate number 203 disqualified. Watching the brutal test unfold, the tension in the arena grew heavier. Students began realizing just how difficult the exam truly was. Meanwhile, Zeke calmly looked down at the number card in his hand, and then the examiner's voice rang out again. Candidate number 315. Zeke slightly raised his card. Is it my turn? Beside him, Langis looked completely shocked. He clearly didn't expect Zeke to be called so soon, but Zeke simply smiled calmly. There's nothing to worry about. With that, he began walking toward the testing field. The examiner watched him closely. Something about this boy felt unusual. And just like that, the next test was about to begin. As Zeke stepped into the arena, the entire crowd quietly watched him. He slowly approached the massive stone used for the examination. For a brief moment, a strange aura seemed to rise around him, almost as if the shadow of another powerful figure stood behind him. An ancient presence, awakening within his body. But from the spectators' seats, none of the students noticed anything unusual. Instead, many of them began whispering among themselves. After all, every student before him had used weapons, and still failed, so they couldn't imagine someone succeeding with bare fists. Among the crowd, Langis watched nervously. His hands tightly gripped his clothes, clearly worried that his friend might suffer the same backlash as the others. Meanwhile, the examiner calmly stood nearby with his notebook, waiting to record the result. But something about the boy's presence made him narrow his eyes slightly, as if sensing something unusual. Standing in front of the stone, Zeke slowly placed his hand on its rough surface. For a moment, he simply studied it, analyzing its structure. Then, he quietly began gathering power inside his body. Suddenly, a blazing aura erupted around him. Golden energy surged outward like flames. The atmosphere in the arena instantly changed. Students in the stands gasped in shock. Even the air itself seemed to tremble. Seeing the overwhelming energy, Langis jumped to his feet in panic. Zeke! But Zeke didn't hesitate. A confident grin appeared on his face, and in the next instant, he moved. With explosive speed, he launched forward, his entire body wrapped in blazing energy, and then he threw a devastating punch straight toward the stone. At that exact moment, Zeke activated a powerful technique, Dragon Slayer combat technique. Golden energy wrapped around his entire body. His fist crashed into the stone with overwhelming force, and instantly, a thunderous explosion echoed throughout the arena. The massive stone shattered. Fragments flew everywhere as the ground shook violently. A powerful shockwave spread across the field. Dust and debris swirled through the air. Langis quickly raised his arms to shield his face as the violent wind rushed through the spectator seats. Even the examiner felt the impact. His coat fluttered as he stared at the scene in disbelief. After several seconds, the dust slowly settled. At the center of the arena, Zeke stood calmly, a relaxed smile on his face, as if the attack had required no effort at all. Meanwhile, the once solid stone target was now completely destroyed. Cracks spread across the remaining fragments. The entire arena fell silent. Students stared with their mouths open, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. One of them whispered in disbelief. He smashed the stone. After all, none of the previous participants had even come close to achieving something like this. And now, the quiet boy they had underestimated had just destroyed the test stone completely. But the examiner quickly realized something even more shocking. That stone was not ordinary. It was actually a regeneration stone, a special object designed to repair itself after every attack. Yet now, the stone was completely destroyed. Even the examiner couldn't hide his surprise, because breaking a regeneration stone should only be possible for someone with at least a 4-star rank. Meanwhile, Zeke casually walked toward him. So how did I do? The examiner looked at him silently for a moment, then finally announced the result. Candidate number 315, pass. Hearing those words, Zeke smiled slightly, satisfied. Shortly after, another official approached him, handing him a small glowing bottle, a special reward given to successful candidates. The officer briefly explained its purpose, but Zeke barely listened. Instead, he simply gripped the bottle in his hand. Excited, he quickly ran up the arena stairs, leaving the testing field behind him. Meanwhile, the students in the stands continued whispering among themselves, because they all realized something important. The quiet boy they had ignored earlier might actually be a terrifying genius. After passing the test, Zeke walked back toward the spectator stands. Langis immediately rushed over to him with sparkling eyes. "Zeke, that was incredible!" He was practically jumping with excitement after witnessing the unbelievable scene in the arena. Meanwhile, Zeke simply lay back against the bench, looking completely relaxed, as if destroying the test stone was nothing special. Langis soon noticed the small bottle in Zeke's hand. Curious, he leaned closer. "What's that?" Zeke looked at the bottle for a moment and shrugged. "It looks like a normal grade item." But the moment he examined it again, something about it felt strange. The liquid inside wasn't ordinary at all. This bottle contained an elixir, a rare potion created from powerful magical materials. Elixirs like this were extremely valuable, because they contained pure elixir cores, substances that normally came from rare plants and powerful magical creatures. In other words, this small bottle held an enormous amount of energy. Curious about its effects, Zeke opened the bottle, and without hesitation, he drank it. The moment the liquid entered his body, a powerful green aura suddenly burst out around him. Energy surged through his entire body, his muscles tightened, his veins glowed faintly, and a wave of power spread through him. Even Zeke looked slightly surprised, because the strength of the elixir was far greater than he expected. Standing nearby, Langis stared at him in shock, clearly realizing that something incredible was happening right in front of him. The potion's power continued circulating through Zeke's body, strengthening him even further. And at that moment, both of them finally realized something. The so-called normal grade potion was actually far more valuable than anyone thought. After the surge of energy slowly settled, Langis looked at Zeke nervously. "Are you okay?" But Zeke simply stood there calmly. In his hand was the now empty bottle. Faint sparkles of energy still lingered around his body. He lifted the bottle slightly, examining it more carefully. Even he looked slightly puzzled. The power inside that elixir had been far greater than he expected. Meanwhile, the arena continued buzzing with activity. The examiner's voice echoed across the field. One by one, students were being called. Some passed, most failed. But besides Zeke, Langis suddenly began trembling. It seemed like he had just remembered something important. Without warning, he suddenly ran down toward the testing field. Zeke blinked in confusion, watching his friend sprint away. What is he doing now? Moments later, Langis appeared again in the arena, but this time he was holding a sword. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes were filled with determination. He gripped the weapon tightly, gathering every ounce of strength he had. Then he shouted loudly and swung the sword with all his power. The blade slammed into the stone target, but the result was immediate. A violent shock burst from the stone. The recoil exploded back into Langis's body. The force launched him across the arena floor. Dust rose into the air as he crashed to the ground. The examiner calmly wrote something in his notebook, as if scenes like this happened every day. Langis groaned in pain, barely able to move. Meanwhile, Zeke watched everything from the stands, his expression completely stunned. The examiner looked down at Langis. "You still have one attempt remaining. Will you continue?" Langis struggled to push himself up. His body trembled. He wasn't sure if he had the strength to try again. Just as he hesitated, a shadow suddenly appeared beside him. Langis slowly looked up and saw Zeke standing there, his arms crossed, watching calmly. Behind them, the testing stone remained completely intact, as if mocking Langis's failed attempt. From the stands, students burst into laughter. Some pointed at him, others mocked him openly. To them, the whole situation was just entertainment. But Zeke didn't laugh. Instead, he quietly looked down at Langis, then spoke calmly. "You're thinking too much." Langis blinked in confusion. Zeke pointed toward the stone. "Stop worrying about the result. Just attack it directly." For a moment, Langis froze, and suddenly, a memory appeared in his mind. A moment from his childhood, his father standing behind him, teaching him how to hold a sword. His father once told him something simple. Swordsmanship doesn't need complicated tricks. Sometimes, the strongest attack is the one that moves straight forward. Back in the arena, Langis slowly tightened his grip. This time, his eyes were completely different. He finally understood what he needed to do. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and lunged directly toward the stone. No hesitation, no complicated movements, just a single direct strike. The spear crashed into the stone with a thunderous impact. Fragments burst outward, a shockwave spread through the arena. For a moment, everything went silent. Then the examiner raised his head and announced the result. Candidate number 414, pass. Langis froze. His mind struggled to process what he had just heard. He passed? Behind him, Zeke smiled, walking over and patting him on the back. See? I told you. Langis stood there in shock, but slowly a smile spread across his face. After everything he went through, he had finally succeeded. The moment the examiner announced the result, Langis could no longer hold back his emotions. Tears immediately filled his eyes. Overwhelmed with relief, he rushed forward and hugged Zeke tightly. He laughed and cried at the same time. After all the humiliation, all the doubt, he had finally succeeded. Meanwhile, the students who had mocked him earlier stared in disbelief. Leaning over the railings, they shouted in shock. They couldn't understand how someone they had just laughed at had suddenly passed the test. Even some of the examiners looked slightly surprised. One officer quietly muttered to himself, "That boy improved quickly." But before the crowd could settle down, something unexpected happened. Several high-ranking officials suddenly arrived at the arena. Their long coats and decorated uniforms immediately drew everyone's attention. The atmosphere instantly became heavier. Students who had been chatting moments ago fell silent. Even the examiners straightened their posture. At the center of the group stood a tall man. Long crimson hair flowed behind him, and his eyes glowed a deep red. An overwhelming aura radiated from his body. The moment he stepped forward, the entire arena felt the pressure. This man was none other than Bolzer Eldragon, the current head of the powerful Eldragon family, one of the most influential bloodlines in the Empire. The moment his identity became known, the tension in the arena increased dramatically. Behind him stood several elite warriors. Each one carried themselves with confidence and authority, clearly people of high status. Meanwhile, Zeke quietly observed everything from the stands. Unlike the others who looked nervous, his expression remained calm. Langis leaned closer and whispered quietly, "That's Bolzer Eldragon, the head of the Eldragon family." Even speaking his name felt intimidating. Just then, Bolzer slowly stepped forward, and suddenly, a dark crimson aura erupted from his body. The energy spread across the arena like a violent storm. The air itself became heavy. Students immediately felt the pressure crushing down on them. Some struggled to breathe. Others instinctively lowered their heads. A few even collapsed onto their seats. "I can't breathe." One student gasped desperately. The aura was simply too overwhelming. Even Langis began trembling beside Zeke. Sweat rolled down his face as he clutched his chest. But Zeke remained completely unaffected. His calm eyes continued watching Bolzer carefully, as if the terrifying aura meant nothing to him. Seeing Langis struggle, Zeke gently placed a hand on his shoulder, trying to steady him. At the center of the arena, Bolzer slowly turned his back and began walking forward. Each step he took carried immense authority. The crimson energy swirling around him made the ground feel heavy. Then suddenly, Bolzer clenched his fist, and in an instant the terrifying aura disappeared, just like that. The suffocating pressure vanished as if it had never existed. Students gasped for air. Some leaned back in their seats completely exhausted. Others wiped sweat from their faces. Meanwhile, one of the officials nearby suddenly laughed, clearly amused by the students' reactions. To him, anyone who panicked over such pressure lacked composure. As the arena slowly returned to normal, Zeke continued watching Bolzer carefully. While everyone else felt relieved, Zeke was thinking about something else entirely, because he had noticed something strange. Bolzer Eldragon's power felt impure and strangely unstable. It was powerful, far more powerful than anyone present, but something about it felt wrong. And deep inside his mind, Zeke quietly began analyzing the terrifying power he had just witnessed, because the strongest warrior in history could tell one thing immediately: the head of the Eldragon family was hiding something. Not long after the pressure disappeared, one of the officials stepped forward. His loud voice echoed across the arena. It was finally time to explain how the academy would organize the new students. The academy was divided into 4 halls: the North Hall, the South Hall, the East Hall, and the West Hall. Each hall represented a different level of talent and status inside the academy. Students would be assigned based on their performance and potential. In other words, where a student was placed would determine their future inside the academy. Hearing this explanation, Langis leaned toward Zeke with excitement. He eagerly pointed toward the large crest displayed above the arena. That's how they divide everyone here. But Zeke simply listened quietly. Unlike the others, he didn't seem particularly impressed. To him, rankings like this were nothing new. Soon after the announcement ended, students began leaving the arena. The examination was finally over. Some students celebrated their success. Others walked away quietly after failing. Meanwhile, Zeke walked through the academy corridors. In his hand, he held a small notice. It contained the location of his assigned room. The quiet hallway echoed with his footsteps. As he walked, he scratched the back of his head thoughtfully. So this is the academy. Eventually, he stopped in front of a wooden door. The number of his room was written clearly on it. Without hesitation, Zeke reached forward and turned the handle. The door slowly creaked open. With a relaxed expression, he stepped inside. But the moment he entered the room, his expression suddenly froze, because inside, someone was already there.